"Please come with me. Your children need a father," said the Duke to the pregnant outcast. On a cold morning, cast from her village and heavy with child, a woman stumbles into the gardens of a grand estate. The Duke, still dressed in mourning black, finds her trembling among the roses. Instead of turning her away, he offers her what no one else dared: protection and his name. But whispers fill the halls. Servants gossip, church bells toll, and a jealous cousin sharpens his schemes. She carries more than a child. She carries a secret that could ruin them both. Will scandal tear apart this fragile bond? Or will courage and love defy the iron chains of class and blood? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. The gray dawn crept over the Sussex countryside, painting the morning sky in somber shades that matched Clara Whitlow's heavy heart. Her worn shoes, once sturdy leather, now cracked and thin, slipped in the mud of the country lane as she trudged forward. One hand clutched a small bundle containing everything she owned in the world, while the other rested protectively over her swollen belly. The child within gave a gentle kick, as if sensing its mother's distress. Clara had not eaten since yesterday morning, and hunger gnawed at her insides like a persistent rat. The parish council's verdict still rang in her ears: unwed and with child, you bring shame to our community. You must leave at once. Cold dew soaked through her threadbare stockings as she pushed through a gap in the hedgerow, desperate to find shelter from the biting spring wind. Her eyes widened as she stumbled onto what was clearly a grand estate. Neat gravel paths wound between carefully tended flower beds, and in the distance, she could make out the imposing silhouette of what must be a noble house. Good heavens, she whispered to herself. One hand pressed to her chest. She knew she shouldn't be here, that this must be private property, but her legs trembled with exhaustion, and the thought of walking another step seemed impossible. Hedges higher than her head created a maze of green walls around her. Clara wandered deeper into the grounds, her mouth falling open at the splendor that surrounded her. Stone fountains, though silent in the early morning hour, stood like sentinels along the paths. Everything spoke of wealth and careful tending, the exact opposite of her own desperate state. The gravel crunched beneath her feet as she rounded another hedge and found herself in what must be the rose garden. Even in the weak spring light, she could see the care with which each bush had been pruned and trained. A few early blooms added spots of pink and white to the greenery. Clara's vision swam suddenly, black spots dancing before her eyes. The lack of food, the endless walking, the weight of her child, it was all too much. Her knees buckled, and she felt herself falling. The last thing she saw was the soft bed of earth between the rose bushes rising up to meet her. Here, over here. The shout seemed to come from very far away. In His Grace's rose garden, running feet approached, and voices spoke over her prone form. Poor things, in the family way, came a woman's voice, full of concern. Someone fetch His Grace, another ordered. You know how particular he is about his roses, but he's still in mourning. Fetch him anyway. He'll want to know about this. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of hands touching her face and neck, checking for signs of life. The voices continued to buzz around her like worried bees. More footsteps approached, these measured and firm. A hush fell over the gathered servants. Your Grace, several voices murmured at once, through barely open eyes. Clara caught a glimpse of black fabric, mourning clothes of the finest quality. A man's voice, deep and cultured, spoke above her. What have we here? Found her collapsed among the roses. Your Grace, someone explained. She's breathing, but weak. And as you can see, the voice trailed off meaningfully. Clara felt the weight of eyes upon her, studying her condition. She wanted to curl up, to hide her shame, but her body refused to move. Bring her inside, the deep voice commanded. The blue guest chamber, I think, and send for Dr. Morton." "But, Your Grace," someone protested, "we don't know who she is." "She could be anyone. She is someone in need." The Duke cut them off firmly. "That is all I require to know at present." Strong arms lifted her carefully, and Clara felt herself being carried. The movement roused her slightly, enough to catch glimpses of her surroundings: marble floors, painted ceilings, gilt-framed portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Everything spoke of a grandeur she had never dreamed of seeing up close. She must have drifted off again, for the next thing she knew, she was being laid upon the softest bed she had ever felt. Voices murmured around her, and she felt gentle hands removing her worn shoes and dirty stockings, replacing them with warm cloths. Time passed in a blur of sensation: cool water at her lips, warm broth carefully spooned into her mouth, soft cloths bathing her face and hands. Through it all, she was aware of a presence nearby, someone sitting quietly. Watching at last, Clara opened her eyes fully, the flickering light of a fire in the hearth greeting her. She lay in a grand four-poster bed, clean sheets soft against her skin, warm blankets tucked carefully around her. The room was larger than any she had ever slept in, with elegant blue wallpaper and heavy curtains at the windows. Turning her head slightly, she saw him, a man seated in a chair near the bed, his clothing black from neck to boots. Even in the firelight, she could see that his face was handsome, though grave, with strong features and eyes that held both authority and kindness. This must be the Duke himself, and Clara felt her heart flutter with fear at the realization. He sat perfectly still, one leg crossed over the other, his hands folded in his lap as he studied her. There were shadows in his eyes, grief, Clara thought, remembering the servant's words about mourning, but also something else. Curiosity, perhaps, and what looked like pity. Clara tried to speak, to explain or apologize, but her throat was too dry. The Duke leaned forward slightly, his expression softening. "Rest," he said quietly. "You are safe here. We can speak when you are stronger." She wanted to protest, to explain herself, but exhaustion pulled at her once more. As her eyes drifted closed, she caught one last glimpse of the Duke's face in the firelight, still watching over her with that same mixture of curiosity and compassion. The last thought that crossed her mind, before sleep claimed her, was wonder at how she, Clara Whitlow, unwed and carrying another's child, had found herself under the protection of a Duke. Surely when he learned her story, his pity would turn to scorn. But for now, she was warm, fed, and safe, and that would have to be enough. Morning sunlight streamed through the embroidered curtains, casting delicate patterns across the guest chamber floor. Clara's eyes fluttered open, taking in the fine furnishings that surrounded her. The bed linens were softer than anything she'd ever touched, and the warmth of the fireplace chased away the last remnants of yesterday's bone-deep chill. As her vision cleared, she saw him, the Duke of Ashford, seated in a carved wooden chair near her bedside. His dark coat and somber expression spoke of mourning, yet there was something gentle in his steady gaze. Clara struggled to sit up, her muscles protesting after her long journey. "Your Grace," she whispered, attempting to rise and curtsy despite her weakness. "I must beg your forgiveness for trespassing upon your grounds." "I never meant to be still," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You are in no condition to stand." He gestured for her to remain in bed, then poured water from a silver pitcher into a delicate china cup. "Drink this first." Clara accepted the cup with trembling hands, acutely aware of the contrast between her work-roughened fingers and the fine vessel they held. After she had taken a few sips, the Duke spoke again. "Now, tell me what brought you to collapse in my rose garden." There was no harshness in his tone, only genuine concern. Clara's eyes dropped to her lap, where her hands twisted in the blanket. I have nowhere else to go, Your Grace. The parish council," her voice caught. They cast me out when they learned of my condition. Understanding dawned in his eyes as they fell to her swollen middle, visible even beneath the blankets. You carry a child. Yes, Your Grace. Tears threatened to spill from her eyes. I was foolish enough to trust a gentleman's promises. He left for London and never returned. The Duke's expression darkened momentarily, but when he spoke, his voice remained gentle. Have you any family? Anyone who might take you in? Clara shook her head. My mother passed 2 winters ago, and my father when I was small. I've been making my way as a seamstress, but now... She gestured helplessly at her condition, to her surprise. The Duke rose and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. He stood there for a long moment, seeming to contemplate the morning light. When he turned back to her, his face held an expression she couldn't quite read. Please come with me, he said softly. Your children need a father. Clara's heart stopped. Surely she had misheard him. Your Grace? I propose a marriage, he continued, his voice steady and clear. Not one of passion, we are both too wounded for that, but one of protection and partnership. You would have a name, a home security for your child. In return, you would help me manage this household and care for my young niece, who sorely needs a woman's guidance. Clara's mind whirled. This couldn't be real, Duke, offering marriage to a fallen woman. But the scandal, Your Grace. Surely your position, my position, allows me certain liberties, he interrupted firmly, and I have never much cared for society's cruel judgments. He paused, then added more softly, Will you accept? Torn between fear and overwhelming gratitude, Clara found herself nodding. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Your Grace. The news spread through Ashford Hall like wildfire. As Clara was helped into a borrowed gown that evening, she could hear the servants whispering in the corridors, their shock evident in every hurried footstep and hushed conversation. The great dining chamber blazed with candlelight when Clara entered on the Duke's arm. The entire household had assembled from the cook to the stable boys, all standing in neat rows, their faces a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. At the front stood a small girl whom Clara assumed must be the Duke's niece, her eyes wide with wonder. I have an announcement. The Duke's voice rang out clearly in the hushed room. Miss Clara Whitlow has done me the honor of accepting my hand in marriage. She will be your future mistress, and you will show her every respect due to the future Duchess of Ashford. A ripple of gasps and murmurs swept through the assembled staff. Clara felt their stares like physical touches, but she kept her chin up, drawing strength from the Duke's steady presence beside her. In this moment, despite all her fears and uncertainties, she knew she had made the right choice. The morning bells of Ashford Hall's chapel rang clear across the grounds as Clara made her way inside, her steps hesitant beneath her borrowed dress. The small chapel's wooden pews gleamed in the early light filtering through stained glass. She slipped into the back row, hoping to remain unnoticed, but she could feel the weight of stares from the assembled servants. Cook's disapproving sniff echoed in the quiet space. 2 maids whispered behind raised hands, their eyes darting toward Clara's middle, barely concealed by the folds of her gown. The stable-master's wife shifted away when Clara sat near her, as if unworthiness might be catching. Clara kept her eyes forward, focusing on the carved wooden cross above the altar. Her mother's words came back to her. Hold your head high, child. The good Lord sees what's in our hearts, not the judgment of others. The morning service passed in a blur of familiar prayers and hymns. As the servants filed out, Clara remained seated, letting the peace of the chapel wash over her. The Duke had shown her kindness beyond imagining, but would his household ever accept her? Her quiet contemplation was interrupted by voices from the chapel entrance. The Duke stood there with the parish vicar, their conversation drifting clearly through the empty space. The banns must be read 3 times. Your Grace, the vicar was saying, his tone carefully neutral, even in unusual circumstances such as these. Then pray begin them this Sunday, the Duke replied firmly. I would have this done properly. A new voice cut through their discussion, sharp, cultured, and dripping with mockery. Properly. My dear cousin, there is nothing proper about this at all. Clara turned to see a gentleman in an elaborate blue coat stride into the chapel. His fine features twisted in a sneer. Lord Edmund, the Duke's cousin. Moved with the easy grace of one born to privilege, I rode as soon as I heard the absurd rumors, Lord Edmund declared, his voice carrying deliberately. Surely you cannot mean to marry a common girl? And one in such a delicate condition? His eyes raked over Clara with calculated disdain. The Duke's face hardened. You forget yourself, Edmund. I forget myself. Lord Edmund laughed coldly. You're the one forgetting your station. Tell me, girl, he turned to Clara, whose bastard do you carry? Some stable boy's. Or perhaps you aimed higher, a merchant's son. How convenient that you should stumble onto these grounds in your time of need. Clara's hands trembled in her lap, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. The chapel fell silent as she stood, her voice quiet but steady. I hide nothing, my lord. I carry my shame openly, but I did not come here seeking advantage. His Grace offered protection when he might have turned me away. I am grateful for his mercy, nothing more. The Duke stepped forward, his tone sharp as steel. That is quite enough, Edmund. You will not insult my future wife in my own house. Whatever her past, she has shown more nobility in her honest humility than you display in your cruel accusations. The servants who had lingered to watch now looked at Clara with new eyes. Cook's expression had softened, and one of the maids offered a small, encouraging smile. Lord Edmund's face flushed with anger, but he bowed stiffly. As you wish, cousin. But you will regret this generosity. He turned on his heel and stalked out. That evening, Clara knelt beside her bed, a single candle casting dancing shadows on the wall. Lord, she whispered, grant me strength to face whatever trials may come. Let me prove worthy of the grace I've been shown. In the corridor outside, the Duke paused in his evening rounds, arrested by the soft murmur of her prayers. Through the heavy oak door, he could just make out her words, filled with such genuine humility and courage. Something stirred in his chest, not pity this time, but a warming of his long cold heart at her quiet strength. The pale dawn light was just beginning to touch the laundry yard when Clara made her way outside. Steam rose from the great copper tubs where maids already worked. Their sleeves rolled up as they stirred linens with long wooden paddles. Though they paused at her approach, Clara didn't hesitate. Please, she said softly, I cannot bear to sit idle while others work. Let me help. The head laundress, Mrs. Potter, studied her with narrowed eyes. His Grace wouldn't approve of his intended doing servant's work. Clara lifted her chin. His Grace offered me protection, not idleness. I've worked honest labor all my life, and I see no shame in continuing. After a moment's consideration, Mrs. Potter nodded and handed her a basket of torn linens. These need mending then. Clara settled onto a wooden bench, threading her needle with practiced ease. The familiar motion brought comfort. This, at least, she knew well. As she worked, the initial stiffness of the maids began to soften. One brave soul asked about a particular stitch she was using, and Clara demonstrated with patient detail. That's ever so neat, young Sally whispered. Leaning closer to watch, the morning wore on, punctuated by the splash of water and murmur of conversation. Around mid-morning, little Beatrice appeared in the yard. Drawn by curiosity about her uncle's mysterious bride-to-be. What are you making? the child asked, hovering near Clara's elbow. Clara smiled warmly. I'm mending these sheets, miss. Would you like to learn a simple stitch? Beatrice nodded eagerly, and Clara showed her how to thread a needle, guiding her small hands through the motions of a basic running stitch. The girl's face glowed with pride at her first wobbly attempt. Look how straight I made it, Beatrice exclaimed, holding up her work. Neither noticed the Duke watching from the terrace above, a faint smile touching his usually stern features as he observed their interaction. The sight of Clara's gentle patience with his niece stirred something in his chest. He'd been felt since his wife's passing. Throughout the week, Clara fell into a simple routine. She took her meals at the servants' table, sharing their plain but hearty fare. Her willingness to eat below stairs rather than demand special treatment earned quiet nods of approval. Each evening, she joined the household for prayers, her clear voice joining the familiar hymns. The real test came at week's end, when several local gentry arrived for supper in the grand hall. Clara sat quietly at the Duke's right hand, conscious of the whispers behind jeweled fans and the pointed looks at her plain dress. Lady Worthington's voice carried deliberately across the table. Really, Your Grace, one must consider appearances. A woman of her background at the head of such an estate. The Duke set down his wine glass with careful precision. The entire table fell silent. I consider character above all else, madam, he said, his tone carrying quiet authority. And I have found more genuine nobility in Miss Whitlow's kindness than in many who boast ancient titles. Clara's cheeks flushed, both at the insult and the defense. But when she dared glance at the Duke, she found him watching her with unexpected warmth in his dark eyes. Something shifted between them in that moment, a spark of connection deeper than their arrangement of convenience. Later that evening, Clara climbed the stairs to her chamber, weary but content. When she opened her door, she stopped short. There on her dressing table sat a crystal vase holding 3 perfect roses, their deep red petals still touched with evening dew. No note accompanied them, but she knew who had sent them. The Duke's silent gesture spoke volumes, and Clara's heart beat faster as she touched the velvet petals. She placed the vase where the moonlight could catch it, understanding that perhaps there was more to this marriage of protection than she had first imagined. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Ashford Hall's breakfast room, casting golden light across the polished oak table. The Duke sat at its head, methodically spreading butter on his toast when the clip-clop of hooves echoed from the courtyard. A messenger, his coat dusty from the London road. Dismounted with haste, Clara watched from her place at the table as a footman brought in a sealed letter on a silver tray. The red wax seal bore a familiar crest that made the Duke's expression darken. He set down his knife, took the letter, and excused himself without a word. In his study, Edward broke the seal and unfolded the thick paper. His hands tightened on the missive as he read, his jaw clenching with each line. The letter spoke of his cousin Edmund's misdeeds in London, of calculated seduction, of false promises whispered to an innocent seamstress's daughter, of abandonment once the deed was done. "Fetch Miss Whitlow," he commanded the footman waiting outside. At once, Clara entered the study minutes later, her steps hesitant on the Turkish carpet. The morning light caught the copper highlights in her brown hair, and her hands twisted nervously in her skirts. "Your Grace." Her voice wavered slightly. The Duke stood behind his massive desk, the letter gripped in his hand. "Why did you not tell me it was Edmund?" Color drained from Clara's face. She swayed slightly, and the Duke quickly pulled a chair closer for her to sink into. I could not speak against a nobleman," she whispered. "Who would believe me? He promised marriage, called me his beloved." Tears welled in her eyes. But once he had what he wanted, he laughed. Said no lord would ever wed a seamstress. The Duke's knuckles whitened around the paper. "He is my cousin, my own blood, and he did this deliberately, knowing full well the consequences for you. Clara pressed her hands to her face. I am sorry, Your Grace. If you wish to withdraw your offer, no. The word rang with quiet force through the study. The Duke circled his desk and knelt beside her chair, a gesture that made Clara's eyes widen. Listen well, Miss Whitlow. Edmund's actions reveal his character, not yours. You were wronged by my own family, no less. I would see that wrong made right. He took her trembling hand in his. I offered marriage for protection, yes. But now I offer it also for justice. Edmund sought to destroy you. I shall instead raise you up. Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. Your Grace is too kind. Edward, he corrected gently. If we are to be married, you must use my name. That evening, as the household gathered for supper, the Duke did something unprecedented. He stood at the head of the table, still holding Clara's hand, and addressed the assembled staff and family members. Let it be known, his voice carried to every corner of the great hall, that this lady is under my protection. Let none dare call her less than Duchess, for she shall be mistress of this house and equal partner in all things. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest as the Duke's strong fingers squeezed hers. The servants, from the cook to the lowest scullery maid, bowed or curtsied deeply. In their faces she saw not the previous doubt or scorn, but genuine respect. Even Mrs. Potter, the stern housekeeper, stepped forward to curtsy. God bless you both, Your Grace, and God bless our future Duchess. The Duke nodded in acknowledgement, his thumb brushing softly over Clara's knuckles. In that moment, standing before the household that would soon be hers to manage, Clara felt something shift in her heart. For the first time since Edmund's betrayal, she stood tall, unashamed. The Duke Edward had given her more than protection. He had given her back her dignity. The morning dawned bright and clear, dew glistening on the rose petals as Clara walked beside the Duke in the garden. Spring had painted the grounds in vibrant colors. Purple crocuses dotted the grass, and early daffodils nodded their golden heads in the gentle breeze. The gravel path crunched softly beneath their feet as they strolled. Your roses are magnificent, Your Grace, Clara said, pausing to admire a pale pink bloom. My mother once grew a single bush beside our cottage. The scent always reminds me of her. Please, the Duke said softly when we are alone. Call me Edward. His eyes held a warmth that made Clara's heart flutter. A butterfly danced past them, and Clara let out a light. Musical laugh, the first time she had truly laughed since arriving at Ashford Hall. The sound seemed to catch Edward by surprise, and his lips curved into a gentle smile as spring days melted one into another. They fell into a pattern of morning walks and evening conversations in the library. Clara spoke of her mother, her skilled hands at the sewing table, her quiet dignity despite their poverty, the lullabies she sang on stormy nights. Edouard, in turn, shared memories of his first wife, Margaret, her love of music, her kind heart. The illness that took her too soon. She would have wanted Beatrice to know a mother's love again, he confided one evening, watching the flames dance in the hearth. I see how the child brightens in your presence. Indeed. Young Beatrice had taken to following Clara like a shadow, clutching her skirts and begging to learn embroidery. Clara taught her simple stitches, praising her careful work. During afternoon lessons, Beatrice would curl against Clara's side as they read together, the girl's golden curls mingling with Clara's dark ones. Show me again how to make the flowers, Clara, Beatrice would plead, holding up her sampler with eager eyes. When invitation arrived for the county spring assembly, Edward insisted Clara attend as his betrothed. The household buzzed with preparation. Mrs. Harrison, the housekeeper, brought down a gown of flowing blue silk that had belonged to the late Duchess. It will suit you perfectly, Miss, she said kindly, helping Clara dress. You've brought light back to these halls. The assembly rooms blazed with hundreds of candles as Clara entered on Edward's arm. She felt the weight of every stare, heard the rustle of whispers behind painted fans. But Edward held his head high, proud to have her beside him. When the musicians struck up a minuet, Edward led Clara onto the floor. Her borrowed silk swirled as they moved through the steps, her cheeks flushed with joy. She had never imagined such a moment dancing with a duke who looked at her as if she were precious. "You dance beautifully," he murmured, his hand warm against hers. The whispers faded to silence as the assembly watched their Duke guide his betrothed with tender care. Even the most critical observers could not deny the obvious affection between them. Later, as they stood in the torchlit garden of the assembly rooms, stars twinkling overhead, Edward took Clara's hand in his. His touch was gentle as he raised her fingers to his lips, pressing a reverent kiss to her knuckles. "My dear Clara," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Clara's heart soared as she met his gaze, her cheeks warming under the starlight. In that moment, she knew their marriage would be more than mere protection. It would be a true union of hearts. The night air was sweet with jasmine as they stood together. No longer Duke and seamstress's daughter, but simply a man and woman in love. Clara's fingers tingled where his lips had touched, and her smile in the darkness held all the joy her heart could contain. The morning sun had barely risen when hoofbeats echoed through Ashford Hall's courtyard. A royal courier, his scarlet livery dusty from hard riding, dismounted before the great doors. The butler hurried to escort him to the Duke's study, where Edward sat reviewing estate ledgers. Clara, who'd been arranging flowers in the morning room, glimpsed the messenger through the window. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down a crystal vase, remembering how the last urgent letter had revealed Lord Edmund's treachery in his study. Edward broke the heavy wax seal bearing Parliament's crest. The parchment crackled as he unfolded it, his expression darkening with each line he read. His jaw tightened, and he reached for the bell pull to summon Clara. When she entered, her steps careful to accommodate her growing child, Edward stood with the letter crushed in his fist. "My dearest," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger, "Lord Edmund has petitioned Parliament to invalidate our marriage contract." Clara sank into a nearby chair, one hand protectively covering her swollen belly. "On what grounds?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. "He claims your common birth makes you unfit to be Duchess of Ashford." Edward crossed to kneel before her chair, taking her trembling hands in his. "I must go to London immediately to defend our rights before Parliament." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. "I shall pack at once." "No," Edward said firmly, pressing her hands. "The journey is too arduous in your condition. 3 days by carriage over rough roads would endanger both you and the child. You must remain here where you are safe and comfortable, but to face them alone." Clara's voice quavered. "I am never alone when I carry you in my heart." Edward's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "I promise to return as swiftly as possible. The household staff will attend to your every need, and Beatrice will keep you company." Within the hour, servants bustled about, preparing for the Duke's journey. His traveling coach was brought around, trunks were loaded, and provisions packed. Clara watched from the top of the grand staircase as Edward issued final instructions to his steward. At last, the moment of farewell arrived. Edward escorted Clara to the estate gates, where his carriage waited. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising a storm. The air felt heavy with approaching rain. "I entrust Ashford Hall to your care," Edward said softly, his formal words belied by the tender way he held her hands. "You have shown wisdom and grace that put many nobles to shame. Remember that when whispers rise." Clara struggled to maintain her composure. "Please be careful in London. Lord Edmund cannot touch what is protected by law and love." Edward's voice was firm. Keep our roses blooming until I return." He helped her step back from the carriage, then climbed inside. The coachman cracked his whip, and the horses started forward. Clara stood motionless at the gates, one hand pressed to her heart, the other cradling her child as the carriage rolled away. The sound of wheels clattering on the road grew fainter and fainter. Storm clouds darkened overhead, and a chill wind tugged at Clara's skirts. Still, she watched, until the carriage was nothing more than a distant speck on the winding road. Only when it had vanished completely did Clara allow her fears to show. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling terribly alone as the first fat drops of rain began to fall. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and she shivered, not from the cold, but from dread of what battles Edward would face in London and what trials she might endure at Ashford Hall in his absence. Thunder crashed against the windows of Ashford Hall as Clara paced her dimly lit chamber. The rain lashed violently at the glass panes, matching her mounting anxiety. Her hands pressed against the small of her back as another wave of pain gripped her, stronger than before. "Oh," she gasped, steadying herself against a bedpost. The pain had started as mere twinges during supper, but now there could be no doubt her time had come. The bell pull jangled as she summoned help. Within moments, Mary, one of the younger maids, burst through the door. Her eyes widened at Clara's state. "The babe." Clara nodded, teeth clenched. "Fetch Mrs. Hopkins, quickly." The household sprang to life despite the late hour. Cook emerged from her quarters, barking orders for hot water and clean linens. Maids scurried through the corridors, their normally quiet footsteps echoing in their haste. Even Mr. Whitworth, the elderly steward, left his fireside chair to dispatch a rider for the physician. The storm's fierce. Milady, the steward, reported, his weathered face creased with concern. "Dr. Morton's a good 4 hours' ride, even in fair weather." "We'll manage," Cook declared, rolling up her sleeves as she entered. "Been at more berths than I can count. Now then, dearie, let's get you comfortable." The hours crawled by like years. Clara alternated between pacing and resting, each contraction stronger than the last. Lightning illuminated the chamber in harsh bursts, followed by thunderous crashes that seemed to shake the very foundations of Ashford Hall. Young Beatrice refused to be sent to bed, hovering anxiously near Clara's side. "Please let me stay," she begged. "I want to help." Clara couldn't refuse the child's earnest face. So like her uncle's, "You can hold my hand, sweet one," Clara whispered between pains. Beatrice's small fingers twined with hers. Offering what comfort they could, the servants gathered in the corridor, their prayers a constant murmur beneath the storm's fury. "Holy Mother, protect them both," Cook intoned, others echoing her words. Clara's cries grew more frequent, her strength failing as dawn approached with no sign of the physician. "She's fading." Mrs. Hopkins whispered to Cook, "The babe's not positioned right." "I fear." Just then, boots thundered on the stairs. Dr. Morton burst in, soaked to the skin, his medical bag clutched to his chest. "My deepest apologies for the delay, my lady. These roads are treacherous tonight." He worked quickly, his methods crude but effective. Clara barely registered the bitter herbs he administered or the sharp commands he gave to the servants. The pain consumed her world, along with desperate prayers for Edward's return. "Push now, my lady," the doctor ordered. With all your might, Clara gathered her remaining strength, Beatrice's hands still clasped in hers. The storm reached its peak, a deafening crash of thunder drowning out her final cry as new life entered the world. Silence fell. Then, blessedly, a thin wail pierced the air. "A son," Dr. Morton announced, relief evident in his voice. Small, but breathing well. Tears streamed down Clara's cheeks as they placed the swaddled infant in her arms. His tiny face was red and wrinkled, dark wisps of hair plastered to his head. "Hello, my love," she whispered, touching his cheek with trembling fingers. Beatrice peered at the baby in wonder. "He's beautiful," she breathed. The servants crowded the doorway, beaming at mother and child. Thunder still rumbled, but softer now, the storm beginning to pass. Clara cradled her son closer, exhaustion settling deep in her bones. "Your father must return safely," she murmured against his forehead. "Must see how perfect you are." The baby's only response was to yawn and nestle closer to his mother's warmth. While outside, the rain continued its steady drumming against Ashford Hall's ancient stones. Rain drummed against the high windows of Parliament as Edward, Duke of Ashford, stood tall before the assembled lords. His travel-worn clothes and mud-splattered boots contrasted sharply with the polished elegance of the chamber. Across the vast room, Lord Edmund's lips curled into a practiced sneer, his perfectly powdered wig and embroidered coat speaking of carefully cultivated appearances. "My lords," Edmund's voice dripped with false concern, "I present evidence that this common woman has ensnared my noble cousin through manipulation and deceit. The very dignity of our peerage stands at risk." He gestured dramatically, producing a stack of papers. "Here are testimonies from her former parish, speaking of her loose morals and calculated schemes." Whispers rippled through the chamber like wind through wheat. Edward's jaw tightened, but he remained steady, waiting. He had not rushed through 3 days of hard travel to lose his composure now. Furthermore, Edmund continued, "The child she carries cannot possibly be of legitimate birth. Such a union would mock everything our noble houses stand for. I move that this marriage contract be declared void, protecting both the Ashford title and my cousin from such unfortunate entanglement." The Duke stepped forward, his boot heels clicking against the marble floor. From his coat, he withdrew a single folded document. "My lords, I hold in my hands a signed confession from Lord Edmund himself." His voice filled the chamber, steady and powerful. In his own hand, he admits to seducing Clara Whitlow under false promises of marriage, then abandoning her to disgrace when she carried his child. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Edmund's face drained of color as Edward unfolded the paper, displaying the unmistakable signature and seal. "You dare," Edmund sputtered. But Edward cut him off. "I dare to speak truth, cousin, while you scheme in London's ballrooms. I have seen true nobility in a woman who faces each day with dignity despite cruel judgment, who works alongside servants without complaint, who shows more grace in her humility than you have ever shown in your privilege." Edward's voice rose with passion, his words echoing off the ornate ceiling. "True nobility is in honor, not birth. It lives in the choices we make, the mercy we show, the promises we keep. I stand before you not just as Duke of Ashford, but as a man who has witnessed real worth in one you would call common." Silence fell across the chamber, heavy as velvet. Even Edmund stood speechless, his carefully constructed accusations crumbling before truth's simple power. The Lord Chancellor cleared his throat. "The petition is dismissed. This chamber finds no cause to void the marriage contract." The gavel struck with finality, but Edward was already striding toward the doors. "Your Grace," called one of his allies. "Surely you'll stay for my wife needs me," Edward called back, not breaking stride. Within moments, he was in the courtyard, ordering his carriage prepared despite the threatening skies. Through the night they drove, changing horses at every post stop. Edward barely noticed the rain soaking through his coat, his thoughts fixed on Clara. The confession had reached him just in time. Edmund's own mistress, stung by similar betrayal, had sent it by secret messenger. Now each mile seemed endless, each moment too long away from Ashford Hall as false dawn began to pale the eastern sky. The carriage finally rattled through the estate's great gates. Edward did not wait for it to fully stop before leaping down, his boots splashing in puddles as he raced toward the main doors. Somewhere above, a light burned in Clara's window, and his heart pounded with equal parts hope and fear. The night's journey had left him exhausted, mud-splattered, and thoroughly undignified, yet he had never felt more certain of his path. Whatever awaited inside, he would face it as the man Clara had helped him become, one who valued true worth above all else. Thunder echoed through Ashford Hall as Edward burst into Clara's chamber, his boots leaving muddy prints on the carpet. He halted at the threshold, heart pounding as he took in the scene before him. Clara lay propped against pillows, pale but alive, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. In her arms, wrapped in soft linen, lay a tiny bundle. Tears filled the Duke's eyes as he crossed the room in 3 long strides and knelt beside the bed. His voice trembled. "My Clara, my love." She turned to him with weary joy, shifting the infant so he could see the small, perfect face. "We have a son, Your Grace." "Edward," he corrected gently, reaching out to touch the baby's cheek. "I am simply Edward to you, my dearest. Parliament has confirmed our marriage, but I come not as your protector now, but as a man who loves you with all his heart." Clara's eyes widened. "You love me?" With every breath, he declared, taking her free hand in his. "What began as duty has blossomed into the deepest love I have ever known. Your Grace, your courage, your gentle heart, you have taught me what true nobility means." From the doorway came a small cry of delight. Beatrice rushed forward, throwing herself into her uncle's embrace. "Does this mean Clara is truly my aunt now, forever and ever?" Edward gathered his niece close, including her in the family circle. "Indeed it does, my dear one. She is your aunt, my wife, and the Duchess of Ashford, recognized by law and loved by my heart." The servants who had attended the birth wiped tears from their eyes. Cook clasped her hands together in joy, while the maids exchanged happy glances. The old steward bowed deeply. "God bless the Duke and Duchess," he proclaimed, his voice thick with emotion. Word spread quickly through the estate and into the village beyond. The Duke's triumph in Parliament, combined with Clara's safe delivery, silenced even the most persistent gossips. In the weeks that followed, Clara regained her strength, supported by the now unified household. Where there had once been whispers and doubt, there was now only respect and affection for the gentle Duchess who had won their hearts as summer settled over Sussex. The roses reached their full bloom. One golden afternoon, Clara walked in the garden she had first collapsed in, now transformed by joy. Edward held their son while Beatrice skipped ahead, gathering fallen petals. The warm air carried the scent of roses and fresh-cut grass. While bees hummed contentedly among the flowers, Edward drew Clara close, his arms strong around her shoulders. "Never again shall you walk alone," he whispered. Pressing a kiss to her temple. From the village church, bells began to toll, no longer in judgment, but in celebration of their Duchess. Clara leaned into her husband's embrace as Beatrice returned to take her hand. Together, they stood in the sunlight, father, mother, daughter, and son, united in love that had overcome every barrier. Thanks for taking a moment to feel with me. If this story reminded you of what matters, hit subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow, continuing our story.